All right, today, day number 2 of this idea of finding a new price while we're dealing with discount and markup and sales tax and also tip and gratuity type problems. In our last lesson, we found the new price, in my opinion, the long way. In other words, we found the amount of markup or discount, and then we had to figure out whether we needed to add it back on to the price or take it away from the price. I call it the long way because it really takes 2 steps in order to get there. That method works great if what you're trying to find is the part, in other words, if you know the whole. But sometimes we don't know the whole. Sometimes we know the part instead of the whole. And so we have to come up with a new method. And so we're going to deal with 2 different methods that both accomplish what we talked about last time, but also in order to deal with a new type of problem. So a little bit of background knowledge. We talked about from 6th grade a couple lessons ago how to convert from a percent to a decimal. We did all of these problems right here, and this is just to remind you of what we did. And then we worked on a lot of problems where we were finding the percent of a number. We had one lesson where we were just finding that percent, and then in the last lesson we were either having to add that back onto the price or take it away from the price. And then also we've been doing a lot of work lately, of course, on solving proportions. And so if we put both of these things together, that kind of links up what we're talking about today. All right. Number 1. And this is now the 3rd time we've seen this problem. A music store's percent of markup is 67%. A CD costs the store $10. Find the selling price. So here's what we did in the last lesson. We found the amount of markup, which tells us since it's a markup, it increases the price. And then we took after we found the markup and then we added it back on. And that's in the far left-hand side of your notes. You don't need to write this down because this is what we did in the last lesson. But today we're going to do this with a proportion and then by using the idea of finding the percent of a number, which is the way that I do them because it's the fastest way to do them. So if we were going to do the same problem with a proportion, we would utilize that idea of percent over 100 equals the part over the whole. And so in order to do that, we need to realize that what we're doing, if we're marking something up 67%, that means that we're actually paying 167%. So you need to write this part down right here. The original price, and we're putting it in with the proportion column of your paper, right in the middle. So the original price was 100% of the price, and we're marking it up 67%. So that means that we are paying actually 167%. Once again, the original price was 100%. If we're marking it up 67%, that means we're actually paying 167% of what it originally was. So when we're using this idea of a percent over 100 equals the part over the whole, that is the percent that we're going to use because we are marking it up 67%. The $10 for the CD cost, that is the whole. So here would be our proportion that we would use to solve that. Go ahead and write that down. All right, so now we solve that by multiplying both sides by 10. And that would give us 1,670 over 100 if we divided both top and bottom by 10. And then did a little bit of division, we would end up with 16.7. So that means that the CD is going to be purchased for $16.70. Okay? So we're going to do a little bit of work today on setting up proportions where we're marking stuff up or discounting it or similar problems to that. Now, once again, we've already done this problem before, so I'm not making a big deal about sentence right now. Now let's go with the way that I do these problems, and that's by finding the percent of a number. And when we were finding the amount of markup or discount, this is what we were doing. But how this works is it works revolving around this idea right here. The CD started at 100%. We marked it up 67%, so we are actually paying 167%. And so what that means is we need to find 167% of $10. So in the far right-hand column, where it says find the percent of a number, you should write this down right here. And in my opinion, this is always the easiest way to do these percent problems. And when I do them, this is how I solve them. Why? Because it's the easiest. You can solve it in one step. We need to turn 167% into a decimal, and we're changing it to a math problem. So this would link back to 2 lessons ago. 167% as a decimal is 1.67, and 1.67 times 10 is 16.7. So once again, we end up with $16.70 for the cost of the CD. Now, if you're a little confused on where I got this selling price, 167%, we're going to work a little bit on that after we go through number 2. Okay? So let's now go to number 2. Number 2, once again, this is the 3rd time we've seen this problem. A video game that regularly sells for $45 is on sale for 25 or 20% off. What is the sale price? Now, on the far left-hand side of your notes, once again, I'm going to go through it the way that we did it last time. We found the amount of discount, which would be 20% of $45. You don't need to write this down because we've already done this in previous notes. To find that amount, we would multiply 0.20 times 45, and that meant that the discount was $9. To find the selling price, we then took that away because it's a discount from the $45, and that gave us $36 for the video game. Now let's go to the proportion route. So let's go to that middle column. In order to find the proportion, we need the percent over 100 equals the parts over the whole. Now, the percent that you're putting in here, remember, we're not trying to find the amount of the discount. We want the sales price. Anybody have any idea what I might be putting in for the percent? And it's not 20%. Because if you use 20%, that's only going to give you the amount of the discount, not the price. What do you think? 120%. Well, that would be true if we were marking it up. We're not marking it up this time. We're now taking it away, right? It's now a discount. 80%. Very good. If it's 20% off, everything starts at 100%. If we take 20% away from that, we now have 80%. The $45 is still the whole. So let me go back. 20% off decreases the price. So we get the 80% by starting with 100 and taking away the 20% to leave me with 80%. So that's the percent that I use in the percent over 100 equals the part over the whole. And once again, the $45 is the whole. And so we set up our proportion. And I'm not going to make you solve this one because we've done this problem before. But we all know we multiply both sides by 45. And, you know, I've mentioned this I don't know how many times. Before I even start to solve a proportion, you know, I would try and reduce that because it would make the numbers a lot easier to deal with. But regardless, we end up with $36 for the video game price. So we could do this with a proportion. But let's now go to what I consider to be the fastest way, which would be finding the percent of a number. And that's where this 80% comes into play. Because what we need to do if we want to find the sale price, we need to find 80% of $45. The 80% once again comes from the fact that I took away 20% from the 100%. This you should be writing down in the far right-hand side of your notes underneath the find the percent of a number. Now, if we convert the percent to a decimal, we end up with 0.8. We multiply that by 45, and once again, we get the $36 there. So our focus today is on trying to figure out whether we want to now do these with proportions or if we want to do them this way right here. This is the fastest way because you can do it in one step. One step. So let's do a little bit of work on one-step percents. So what if you were marking something up 34%? What percent would you use if you're going to do it either the proportion way or the finding the percent of a number? What would you use? Think about it for a second. You're marking it up 34%. Once again, everything starts at 100%, so we're going to take 34%, we're going to mark it up 34%. That gives us 134%. All right. I think most of you get the idea of what we're doing here. I'd like you to do the same thing, but for all of 2 through 7, we'll compare with our shoulder partners and then we'll go through them. Once again, go ahead and do 2 through 7. Number 2, a discount means money is being taken away from what you are supposed to originally pay. So a discount of 26% is 100% minus 26%, which is 74%. If you're using a proportion for a situation like that, and you were asked to find the selling price, 74 over 100 equals the part over the whole. If you're doing the new fast way, 0.74 times whatever the original price was. Number 3, a mark down. So we're marking the price down in the downward direction. That means we're taking away, that would be 67%. 42% off, we're taking away 42%. That means it should be 58%. A 19% tax, when you pay tax on something, you are paying more. So the price is being moved up. That's 119%. Number 5, a 21% tip. When you're paying someone a tip at a restaurant, you're paying more onto the actual bill. So that's 121%. And remember, we learned last time that gratuity is just another word for tip. Therefore, it should be 143%. All right, I want you to listen very carefully. For the rest of the problems, and we're going to do them one at a time, I don't want you to do them the way that we did them last week. I want you to either use a proportion or finding the percent of a number. That's the new thing for today, because from those two methods, I want you to pick which method works best for you. Am I asking you to do a proportion and the percent of a number? Yes or no? No, I'm asking you right now to pick a method. So for number 3, either solve it with a proportion or solve it by finding the percent of a number. The new methods that we learned today. Pick one. Okay? Go. Number 3. I'm going to do this all 3 ways. The way that we did it last week, which was by finding the amount of the markup, which is $15, and then adding it back on. I didn't ask you to do it that way today. The reason is simple. In the last lesson, that's the way you found it. And then today we added these 2 new methods. We are finding the selling price, so we need to use one of these 2 methods. We're marking it up 25%. That means we're going to actually pay 125% of the actual price. And so if you used a proportion, percent over 100 equals the part over the whole, it would be 125 over 100 equals n over 60, and then solve that, which ends up being $75 for the price. But the fastest way is by finding the percent of a number. So finding 125% of $60. The reason why that's the fastest way, and remember, the only reason we're doing it this way is because we're finding the selling price. This is the fastest way because you can do it in one step. And we find that by multiplying 1.25, which is 125% as a decimal, times 60, and that means we get $75. All right, everybody quickly try. Number 4, either use a proportion or find the percent of a number for the sale price. All right, so here's how we would have done this problem in the last lesson. We would have found the amount of discount and then took that away from the selling price because it's a discount. The proportion way, we need to find the percent that we're going to use, which is 68%, because we're paying 68% of the original price. We could use a proportion, which would give us $54.40, or we could find 68% of 80, which is still $54.40 for the cost of the shoes. Now, we've got two more what I term as regular problems. Now, I want you to listen very carefully before you do number 5. I sense that most of you right now are using this method. If you are using that method, I do want you to set up your proportion. You don't have to solve the proportion though. Just set it up. If you're already using a proportion, you don't have to do anything more than that. And the reason why I'm doing that is to help clear up when we get to number 7 and 8. So if you're using this method, please at least also set up the proportion, but you don't have to solve it. All right, go ahead and try number 5. Sales tax means you are paying more. Therefore, the percent that we would use, either with a proportion or percent of a number, would be 108%. Here is how we did this problem last lesson. We found the amount of sales tax. We find that by finding 8% of $75 and then adding it back on. But that takes a lot more work. With a proportion, we use 108 over 100 because that's the percent that we're now going to pay. And the 75 represents the whole. The fastest way is by finding the percent of a number, so we would find 108% of $75, but regardless of which method you use, we should get $81 for the price. Now I wanted you to also write this down, and it's because we're going to come back to this. Once again, this is now the 5th problem in a row where we've been given the whole and not the part. Okay? All right, everybody go through and do number 6, please. Remember, gratuity is a fancy way of saying tip. This is the way that we did this in the last lesson. We found the 20% gratuity and then we added it back on to the price, because when we're paying a tip, which is what gratuity is, we're adding it back on, which means we're increasing the price. The proportion way, we would want to use 120%. So that would be 120 over 100 equals n over 47.5, because the $47.50 is the whole, and we get $57 for the total price. Or the percent way, it would be $57. Now before we go on, I want to make one thing very clear. This 57 that we just found is the price after the gratuity. That's the price after the 20% off. Okay? We need to keep that in mind for number 7. So here's what I want you to do with number 7. I don't want you to solve it. All I want you to do for number 7 is to come up with what method you think is going to work. So if you were doing these with a proportion, set up the proportion that you think would work for number 7. I don't want you to solve it. If you're using the method of finding the percent of a number, write down that mathematics problem that you think we could use to solve it. But don't solve it. I'll give you about 45 seconds. So let's take a look at this. Most of you were listening and you didn't solve it. I didn't want you to solve it because if you had the incorrect method written down, you would have done a bunch of work for nothing. After a 20% discount, the price of a skateboard is $140. That's what the answer is after the 140% or after the 20% discount. We're trying to find what it was before the discount. So we're gonna add a little something new that I would like you to write down in your notes somewhere. We know this. Okay, we already know that. But in these selling price problems, another way of thinking about this is the price afterwards, or after the discount. This is the price before. So if that's the case, first of all, we have a 20% discount. That leaves 80%. The price of the skateboard is $140. That's after the discount. So those of you who thought the 140 was the whole, that was an incorrect assumption. That's why I'm asking you to write this down right here. That will help you on some of these problems, but you're still going to have to think about what it is you're finding, what it is you're given, what it is you're looking for, and so on. Could I get all of you to solve that proportion, please? All right, so the original price is 100%. We're taking away 20%, which leaves us with 80%. As a proportion, remember the 140 is the part. We need to use the upside down property. I would not have multiplied straight across. I would have heavily reduced this thing right here to at least 10 over 8 at a very minimum before I even started. But regardless of that, we should get $175. That was the price of the skateboard before you got a 20% discount. Now, today we learned a one-step method. So how could we apply that one-step method? You might want to write this down if you're interested in doing this without a proportion. In every single one of these problems today, we found the percent of a number. The problem in this one is that 80% of something is $140. So what we have to do is we could set up a simple equation that would look like this. Because in all the other problems today, we were finding this by multiplying these two things together. But now, it's this price that we're trying to find. So at this point, we take this one-step equation, divide both sides by 0.80, and 140 divided by 0.80 is $175. So if you wanted to do it in one step, it would be like that. Okay? All right, I would like everybody to try number 8. I don't care what method you use. In number 8, it costs $75 to buy a jersey after a 25% markup. That $75 is after the markup. Therefore, it is the part. And if you had written down that proportion in words that I had asked you to write down, it would have been very clear. We are trying to find the price before the markup. Therefore, we are finding the whole. So if you're going to use a proportion, remember markup means we're increasing it, so that's why it's 125%. This is the proportion that you should use. The after price is the part. The before price is the whole. From there, we all know how to solve that. We should get $60. If you're going to do it the one-step way, 125% of some number is $75. We could set up a simple one-step equation by changing the 125% to a decimal of a question mark would be like times a variable. Divide both sides by 1.25, and we would get $60, regardless of the method that we used. All right, we are finished for today.